When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and welcome to another episode of EPL Market Matrix. The window is open, ladies and gents, and things are starting to happen, aren't they? There's being bids made, bids rejected. There's even, in American style, player trades galore being discussed between your Villas, your Chelseas. Everton are even involved in it, I've seen today as well. So basically, if you've got FFP issues, buy, sell and trade players. That seems to be the answer galore. So here to review certain players, certain targets that we know have been linked, we know are potentially moving, or have got strong stories against us. We've got Ben Bocsak as ever. Ben, how are we?
Yeah, I'm very well, and I'm looking forward to sort of discussing some of these players because I think they're all interesting targets for Premier League clubs, and for various reasons. I think there's actually probably a question mark about all of them as well. So it's going to be interesting to get into that as well.
Yeah, that's fair. Nothing is certain at this stage with the players. Probably some hotter than others, but there's something around all of them. So we'll get into it, ladies and gents. And we'll start with a name you've probably heard in transfer talk, no doubt, Jarrod Branthwaite. The Everton centre-back did not make the England squad to many surprise. I mean, what have the headlines been around this, Ben? This is crazy. I mean, you know, Everton want somewhere between 70 to 80 million. The latest bid from United was 43 million. Now, that was including of add-ons, according to the Telegraph. So 35 million plus 8 in add-ons. So there's a big gap, it's fair to say, between the two. This has been a player that some fans who are looking at him will say he was in one of the best defences, how well he's done and all these types of things. Some will say, that's a big feat for someone who's untested right at the top and doesn't even have European football on his CV. So let's get into this first one then, Ben. Jarrod Branthwaite. What are the metrics saying for Jarrod Branthwaite and the possibilities?
I mean, I think immediately when you look at a centre-back, you look at defensive duels. Obviously, first volume and then success rate as well. So volume-wise, he's average. He's quite average when it comes to centre-backs. He's not low, not high. Between 5 and 6 defensive duels per 90. But when it comes to success rate, does actually rank 4th among centre-backs in the Premier League. So he has a very high success rate. I think the question marks for me is he's quite a tall player. And I think this surprised me because he's known to be strong in the air, but the numbers don't necessarily reflect that, actually. His averages are sort of relatively high volume of aerial duels, but it doesn't actually rank him in the top 10 among centre-backs. And he sort of wins just under 60% of them, so it's 59 something, which is not great. It's okay, you would say, for a centre-back, but it's nothing spectacular, especially when you mentioned the 70-80 million fee. It doesn't warrant that kind of figures. And then when we're looking at sort of his passing numbers and stuff, it's so difficult to measure because they are low, but he did play for Everton. So like, it's so difficult to sort of scale how he would do in a different team. I think I looked at his numbers when he was at PSV, and actually his forward passing numbers and stuff like that was actually really good. But again, that's a completely different level to the Premier League. You don't have teams pressing you as intensely in the Eredivisie. So it is difficult. And I think Manchester United's fee of, what did you say, 43 million? Is probably a lot fairer than the kind of fee that Everton will demand. And I know Everton are in a desperate situation, but I still don't think that he warrants the 70 to 80 million fee.
It's such a tough one. It's like you say, there's the English tax. We can bring things into the equation here. English tax is always going to be there, and the English tax for a young player who's an international. So I can build that into the equation. I can say, like as you mentioned, did well at PSV, so experience of a European league that way. Not in the Premier League this season, but wider. So the unicorn as well, Ben, a left-footed centre-back. We know the extra value they carry in that sense as well. So there are pros. I can put things on his feet. But like you said, the stats actually, the aerial duels aren't standing out. They're not putting him in like the top 10 of Premier League defenders. And maybe a good question to ask for other fans is, how many defenders in the Premier League are worth 80 million or that supposed fee in that regard? So you can really balance it two ways. Now, the one thing I do want to put to your Branthwaite to sort of really put it into frame it, I should say, in the right way. There's been other links to United. We can't debate this. We've seen they clearly have tried to do Todibo from Nice, but Jim Ratcliffe's been shot down in terms of multi-club, so that was one that came in. There's been links to De Ligt, various other centre-backs. We can't pretend, but this is the one we know United have bid for. Based on your pros, your cons, your metrics, and what you're telling, or everything's telling you, do United go a second time? And is it that much higher? What's your gut telling you in that regard? Because I don't think 70 to 80 is ever going to come on the table as much as Everton might like it, especially with their FFP, PSR issues. But do you think United come back in? Is your gut telling you it could happen?
Yeah, I can't see even United, who we've seen pay ridiculous money, pay that kind of figure for Branthwaite. But I do think, realistically speaking, maybe 50 million, given all the things that you listed in terms of being a rare commodity, homegrown, left-footed, and he is decent. Like, he is a good defender. I don't think he's an elite defender in the Premier League yet, but he is good. So given his age and everything else, 50 million, I think, in this market is probably the kind of deal that isn't necessarily overpaying too much for United. But I think anything above that would I'd consider as overpayment and as a bit of a risk.
Yeah, it's such a tough one to call this. We've done them before, haven't we? As ladies and gents, with Sesko and other players tried to predict. It's United, so I agree with Ben. Nothing would surprise me either way. The one thing we're both certain on, Everton are not getting £70 million for Jarrad Branthwaite. It's whether United do come back for a second time and bridge that gap. But yeah, like you say, anything north of 50, you're thinking you've paid top whack. You've not exactly got a bargain, shall we say. So yeah, maybe dictated as well by what Everton do with others, the likes of Amadou Onana possibly going out. So definitely a one to keep an eye on, though, Branthwaite. Do United go a second time? And speaking of one that's hot, Ben, this one's crazy. Douglas Luiz, the whole premise of this deal is crazy. Villa's FFP, PSR issues are well known. So there was well-known suspicion they might have to sacrifice or look at a player. I don't think that many necessarily had Douglas Luiz. And if they did, I'm pretty certain many didn't have him in this type of trade. I mean, the latest suggestions are that we've had everything with this. Juventus will give Aston Villa money, around 20 million euros, and 2 players. Now, Weston McKennie's been in the mix. There's another one suggesting he might not be in the mix as well. But this deal is live. And God knows what Villa fans think of this, because I think from the outside, Ben, Douglas Luiz, he's been one of their best players that's helped them get into the Champions League. Let's talk Douglas Luiz first of all, before we go anywhere else. Am I exaggerating, or are his metrics showing that well for how well he's done for Villa this season? What are the metrics telling us?
It is sort of difficult to assess sort of box-to-box midfielder, because you're looking for decent defensive output, but decent offensive output as well. I do think in this case, FBref might actually be a good measure. If you look at it, his stuff is especially when it comes to defensive stuff is green, which is good. I think he's always been sort of misclassed as a holding midfielder, which he is not. He's a box to box number 8 type of player. I don't think he's extraordinary. I think he's decent. I think the numbers sort of reflect that as well. But since you mentioned Weston McKennie as a potential sort of alternative, or he could be someone who could be involved in the swap deal, I think it might disappoint Juventus fans, but probably it might offer some solace to Aston Villa fans. I don't think they're completely like that far away apart from each other. So if we're looking at defensively, McKennie has won 63% of his attempted tackles. Douglas Luiz has only won 47%. So and then when we're looking at XG and expected assists, Douglas Luiz has averaged 0.37 per 90, and McKennie 0.24. So that's slightly less, but not a significant difference. Not sort of, you mentioned the 20 million fee. I don't think it's that much of a gap between them. So on paper, this could actually be a decent deal for Villa, especially if 2 players are involved, because you get almost a direct replacement who's not far away from Douglas Luiz. And at the same time, I don't think he's the most important player for Villa. I think if we're looking at their midfielders, got McGinn, who's probably more important, Jacob Ramsey coming back as well. There's plenty of players there who I think will ensure that they'll be okay, sort of heading into the Champions League football. And on top of that, you have McKennie coming in as well. So I don't think it's the worst deal for Villa. I think they'll be disappointed to lose him, because I think Villa fans saw him as a fan favourite, and he's a hard worker. But I don't think it's an awful deal for them.
Such a strange one as well. I mean, this type of say where Illing Jr. is actually he's at Juventus, but he's an England under-21 left winger, isn't he? International that way as well. So he's the other one that's mooted to come over with the cash involved, around 20 million euros. I mean, the whole craziness to this deal, Ben. I mean, the possibility we're talking about 2 players and cash for Douglas Luiz. This is only happening because of FFP, isn't it? PSR, these types of deals. And it wouldn't even be surprised if before the 30th of June and when we reconvene next week, we're talking about another of these types of crazy moves. I mean, Villa, Chelsea, apparently, and Everton now lined up in all sorts of horse trading nonsense, as it were. This is FFP, isn't it? This is PSR talking. This is not just a pure football deal.
Absolutely. And I think it's not a coincidence that, I think it was not the last podcast, but the podcast before, we were talking about a similar type of deal for Conor Gallagher between Chelsea and Aston Villa. So, I think it's just the nature of these sort of tighter restrictions that have been imposed. I think we'll see a lot more trades and those kind of things that I think if you're an American sort of sports fan, you are accustomed to seeing. It happens all the time in the NBA and in the NFL as well. Yeah. So I think it's just something that's going to happen more and more now in football too.
Crazy. Yeah, absolutely. But like you said, if you're into American sports, and we have to accept that some of these clubs are owned by American owners, aren't they, as well? So yeah, they will be used to that method of business. And I mean, you talked about a couple of players there. The intricacies between Chelsea and Villa, 2 clubs who we know are having FFP, PSR issues. Conor Gallagher, that's a Villa to Chelsea link that way as well. We've had Ian Matson. That looks like there's an agreed fee, so that might get done as well. So a Chelsea player going to Villa Park. However, Ben, this one about 3 or 4 days ago seemed to be Matt Law confirmed it in the Telegraph, and it's gone quiet. And it's a strange one because it's gone quiet. And Chelsea then bid for another striker in true Chelsea style. So this one, if you haven't guessed by now, ladies and gents, we're talking about Jhon Duran, young striker, Colombian international, came across from the MLS. I mean, the interesting thing that struck me with this, Ben, before we talk numbers, is he seemed to be a minimal fee that Villa got him for. He's one of those £8 to £10 million punts, as I call it, where you take a gamble and you think if it doesn't work, we'll sell him on, or we think this kid can be developed. And all the talk from Matt Law, the Telegraph and others were 40 million quid or somewhere around 40 million. And again, suggestions that he could be part of some player trade or used in that way. But from 8 million a year ago to 40 million now, can you make that work with the metrics that you have for Jhon Duran and potential even?
It's difficult. It's very difficult. And I think when I said at the start of the podcast that I do have question marks, this is the one that I have the most question marks about because, okay, if we're looking at it on paper, he ranked in the top 5 players out of forwards for goals per 90 in the Premier League. So only Jota, Callum Wilson, Erling Haaland and Ishak ranked above him. However, if we're looking at his XG, that was a massive overperformance last season. He overperformed his XG by 0.4 per 90, which is huge. So to put that into context, he scored 5 goals. His actual XG was 1.91 in total. So it's a big overperformance, very small sample size as well. So that leaves a lot of question marks. His goal conversion was decent, but again, small sample size. I do think he's a good finisher. I do think he has a lot of potential and he's a good player. But when we're talking about a £40 million figure, that's a lot. I mean, you only have to pay, I think, maybe 10, 15 or 20 million more, and you're getting someone like Dominic Solanke, for example, who's scored 17 Premier League goals this season, and he's more of a proven goal scorer than Duran. So it wouldn't surprise me if Chelsea were to do it because they seem to do a lot of, Chelsea were to do it because they seem to do a lot of these transfer deals. However, I mean, the lad that they're targeting now is also a very sort of similar profile to Duran. Maybe a bit bigger of a sample size, but it's not in the Premier League, it's in La Liga. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the number 9 market is a very difficult one at the moment. Victor Osimhen obviously seems like one that everyone wants to get, but Napoli look reluctant to let both him and Kvaratskhelia go, and at this moment in time, based on what Kvaratskhelia's agent is saying, it seems he's more pushing for that move. And I went to Naples, and I can understand why Osimhen would want to stay. He's pretty much idolized there as a second Maradona almost. So I understand, especially when there's not that many clubs who are willing to pay that fee for him. Then you have Victor Gyökeres, again, big fee to pay. And I think I can't really see a lot of clubs paying that fee too. So obviously you had Benjamin Sesko, but he's decided to stay put. So it's a difficult market, this number 9 market. Those 3 are probably like the outstanding candidates. And then after that, there's not, like, you just have your Durans and those kind of players. And it does mean you have to take a gamble. And it just depends on, where Chelsea are at financially and whether they think this is a good move. But for me, it would just raise more question marks. This is not a transfer that would help Chelsea get to sort of the next step in their evolution. It's just more of a project signing and one more project player for their squad.
Yeah, just like you say, those players. Sesko, we know he was attracted to people because of the move, but also the clubs liked him because of the release clause. They knew what they were getting. You even mentioned one there that I've seen in the paper in the last few days, Dominic Solanke, but quite a few reports said that he's out of Chelsea's range because of the nature of his price tag. So it does feel like, I think it's pronounced Amora Dion, the one who's been on loan at Alaves, but is an Atletico Madrid player, and Duran, that they are in this, you call it that next project here, as in we have to shop there. Can we get the right one? I'm intrigued by this. We'll finish this final thing on Duran because we've got a lot of question marks about it. No two ways. You can't disguise that. The fact Chelsea have gone in and had a bid rejected for Amora Dion, did you take that as Chelsea have also got question marks over Jhon Duran and they might just be having second thoughts on which one is the best project, shall we say, to take forward?
I think so. And I think I have to agree with them if that's their decision, because I do think there's a lot more potential. And I can't pronounce his name, but the Atletico Madrid / Alaves guy, his numbers reflect that too.
Yeah.
And obviously he's got a much bigger sample size. And I think he's got that potential that he could fit really well in the Premier League too. I think he's even though he's grown up in the Liga and he's a Spanish player, he's got the physical aspects to make it in a more demanding league like the Premier League. At the same time, he's really smart, I think, when it comes to his decision making. He knows how to get in and around the box. He's got that striker's instinct. And for me, he's absolutely the better player, although I think Chelsea will have to pay potentially 10, 15 million more. I think it's worth it.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what Chelsea do. And to be honest, ladies and gents, we're not even going to try and predict what we think Chelsea will do, because if there's one thing that people don't know in football or will just surprise you, it's what moves Chelsea will make all of a sudden, who will sell, who they'll trade, who they'll exchange. So, yeah, we're not going to gamble on that one. But the Duran one, that will be one to keep an eye on. And we'll finish in one final place. Not one that we know, Ben, is advanced by any means, especially not compared to the other three by any means, but a player that keeps coming up with these two clubs. So this link's been going on for a while. Max Beier, German forward. He's at the Euros with the Germany squad. He's not featured yet. He's not started for them. However, the Hoffenheim forward, youngster, been linked with Liverpool and United repeatedly. These clubs are seen as having an interest. Now, it's an interesting one, Ben, because he has a specific release clause. The suggestions are it's 32.5 million euros. So it's not the highest amount. It kind of feels like calculated gamble territory, doesn't it? We talk about that for clubs quite often, especially those types of teams that will take those punts, as it were. Got quite a few goals for his club as well. Hoffenheim, not the most fashionable team, it's fair to say as well. So there's some things that intrigue us. What do the stats say about Max Beier?
Again, slight overperformance when it comes to the XG. 12.3 XG, 16 goals. So it's one that I think you kind of have to note down. He's very fast. I think he would be very good in a transition team, ranked in the top 20 Bundesliga players for top speed. Actually just ranked behind Benjamin Sesko. So, we all know how fast Sesko is. So, he, for me, as a winger, he definitely feels like more of a goal scorer than a creator. So, 12.3 XG, but only 2.6 expected assists, which is quite low. I think one thing that surprised me, given his speed, is that he doesn't dribble as much. He only sort of attempts around 3 dribbles per 90, which, I know he doesn't play in the greatest of teams in Hoffenheim, but it's quite low. So he definitely seems like the kind of player, especially if you're looking at his heat map, who likes to maybe not bring the ball into the penalty area, but sort of receive the ball in the penalty area instead. So I do wonder if because he's quite tall as well and he's got that speed, I do wonder if it can sort of be molded into a sort of number 9. I think there's potential there if he sort of bulks up a little bit, because he's got quite a small frame on him. So I would worry if he was to come to the Premier League to be an out and out number 9. But there is, I think, potential there, and he seems to be a good finisher based on this season. 20% goal conversion is really decent, especially when you're playing on the wing. So I think there's a lot to like about him. He's still quite young, and but again, the big thing and the big question mark is he does feel like a project signing, because I'm not quite sure what you are getting with him completely as a winger, especially in like United system. I think they need someone who can dribble and who can progress the ball and create as well, rather than have someone who can just run in behind defences and receive the ball inside the penalty area. So it is intriguing, but I do like him. I think he's a good player.
Yeah, it's an interest. Like you say, it seems to profile almost better as a forward. He is overperforming his XG, so that's a little question mark against him. The frame is slender. He's really tall, like you say, but slender frames. You'd have question marks against United and Liverpool. And I suppose that's probably the best question to ask. A project signing, it feels like, again, Ben, does United or Liverpool not just seem almost a step too far for this kid right now, that if he was going to come to a Premier League, not to be diminishing of anyone else, but it would be someone below that tier maybe before he took that step, if he's good enough?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's too far. I think if I were him, I'd move to maybe a Leipzig, but I would have moved if Openda and Sesko, one of them would have moved. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I don't know. I would maybe Dortmund. He has to move to, I think, a sort of transition team rather than a possession-based team. I think that's the objective for him. If I were him, I'd stay in the Bundesliga for now, just for his development. Not sure which club, but that's the way I would go. I think coming into the Premier League would be a bit too soon, especially at those clubs. Maybe I think it'd probably be a sort of better signing for like a Brentford maybe, and sort of a mid-table club. I actually think he'd actually fit really well at Brentford.
Yeah.
But they got a very similar type of forward in Kevin Schade, who was also linked with Liverpool as well. So you can see why he is being targeted by Liverpool, because very much when under Jurgen Klopp, that was the kind of style that Liverpool like to play. But for now, I think that step is just too much, too far ahead for him. I think he needs to bridge the gap first and prove himself in a better team, and answer some of the questions that we have about him as well.
Well, ladies and gents, there you go. Branthwaite, there's talent. 70 to 80 million, not a chance. Will United come back in? Possible. Douglas Luiz, Villa fans, he may be a fan's favourite, and that doesn't mean we're not saying he's a bad player, but if the deal can be done right, it might not be as bad as it first seems. But we do appreciate that's not getting done without some sort of FFP, PSR. Jhon Duran, Chelsea fans, I think Chelsea themselves, by the way they're moving for the Atletico Madrid forward, might just be reevaluating that, and we think that's the same. And yeah, Max Beier, talented, young, a project, but United or Liverpool, a step too far for us at this stage, as the metrics tell us. So we will be back next week, ladies and gents. And Ben, let's be honest, the way everything's ramping up at the moment, by next week, you can guarantee we're going to have at least 4 that are probably moving along, if not revisiting them. It's just starting to hit crazy time now a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, obviously, by next week, some of the players who are competing at the Euros will know their fate.
Yeah.
And there's going to be players who are going to be eliminated. So I think that's going to sort of speed things up as well, because a lot of the players sort of didn't want to think about their futures before the Euros. They wanted to concentrate on the competition, but there will be some disappointed players who will now sort of want to concentrate on that. And I think that's going to speed things up as well.
Yeah, no doubts. And that 30th of June FFP deadline will inch ever closer at the same time. So what it leaves me to do is, as ever, thank Ben. Thank you for listening, ladies and gents. And that was another EPL Market Metrics.
Sports Social Podcast Network.